The sole purpose of this channel is to bring to light events and situations that the Trump administration is responsible for, either directly or indirectly. It is our viewpoint that Trump and his cronies have done more damage, either directly or indirectly, to this country than any other president in the history of the United States, and that he must be stopped. To that end, we hope you will support this channel and help us see this tyrant removed from office. USA disgrace.
Ukraine. Now, let me provide additional details specifically about Ukraine and my involvement. From my very first days as ambassador to the EU, starting in July 2018, Ukraine has featured prominently in my broader portfolio. Ukraine's political and economic development are critical to the long-lasting stability of Europe. Moreover, the conflict in eastern Ukraine and Crimea remains one of the most significant security crises for Europe and the United States. Our efforts to counterbalance an aggressive Russia depend in substantial part on a strong Ukraine. On April 21, 2019, Vladimir Zelensky was elected President of Ukraine in an historic election. With the express support of Secretary Pompeo, I attended President Zelensky's inauguration on May 20, as part of the U.S. delegation led by Energy Secretary Rick Perry. The U.S. delegation also included Senator Johnson, Ukraine Special Envoy Kurt Volker, and Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman of the National Security Council. My attendance at President Zelensky's inauguration was not my first involvement with Ukraine. As I testified previously, just 4 days after assuming my post as ambassador in July 2018, I received an official delegation from the government of then Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko. This meeting took place at the U.S. mission in Brussels and was pre-arranged by my career EU mission staff. Later, in February 2019, I worked well with U.S. Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch in making my first official visit to Ukraine, for a U.S. Navy visit to the strategic Black Sea port of Odessa. I raised these prior Ukraine activities, the meeting in Brussels and my visit to Odessa, to emphasize that Ukraine has been a part of my portfolio from my first days as U.S. ambassador. Any claim that I somehow muscled my way into the Ukraine relationship is simply false. President Zelensky. During the Zelensky inauguration on May 20, 2019, the U.S. delegation developed a very positive view of the new Ukrainian government. We were impressed by President Zelensky's desire to promote a stronger relationship with the United States. We admired his commitment to reform. We were excited about the possibility of Ukraine making the changes necessary to support greater Western economic investment. And we were excited that Ukraine might, after years of lip service, finally get serious about addressing its well-known corruption problems. With that enthusiasm, we returned to the White House on May 23 to brief President Trump. We advised the President of the strategic importance of Ukraine and the value of strengthening the relationship with President Zelensky. To support this reformer, we asked the White House for two things: first, a working phone call between Presidents Trump and Zelensky, and second, a working Oval Office visit. In our view, both were vital to cementing the U.S.-Ukraine relationship, demonstrating support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression, and advancing broader U.S. foreign policy interests. Unfortunately, President Trump was skeptical. He expressed concerns that the Ukrainian government was not serious about reform. He even mentioned that Ukraine tried to take him down in the last election. In response to our persistent efforts to change his views, President Trump directed us to talk with Rudy. We understood that talk with Rudy meant talk with Mr. Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer. Let me say again, we weren't happy with the president's directive to talk with Rudy. We did not want to involve Mr. Giuliani. I believed then, as I do now, that the men and women of the State Department, not the president's personal lawyer, should take responsibility for Ukraine matters. Nonetheless, based on the president's direction, we were faced with a choice: we could abandon the efforts to schedule the White House phone call and White House visit between Presidents Trump and Zelensky, which was unquestionably in our foreign policy interest, or we could do as President Trump had directed and talk with Rudy. We chose the latter course, not because we liked it, but because it was the only constructive path open to us. Rudy Giuliani. Over the course of the next several months, Secretary Perry, Ambassador Volker, and I were in communication with Mr. Giuliani. Secretary Perry volunteered to make the initial calls with Mr. Giuliani, given his prior relationship. Ambassador Volker made several of the early calls and generally informed us of what was discussed. I first communicated with Mr. Giuliani in early August. Mr. Giuliani emphasized that the president wanted a public statement from President Zelensky committing Ukraine to look into corruption issues. Mr. Giuliani specifically mentioned the 2016 election, including the DNC server, and Burisma as two topics of importance to the president. We kept the leadership of the State Department and the NSC informed of our activities. That included communications with Secretary of State Pompeo, his counselor Ulrich Brecht-Buell, and Executive Secretary Lisa Kenna, within the State Department, and communications with Ambassador John Bolton, Dr. Fiona Hill, Mr. Timothy Morrison, and their staff at the NSC. They knew what we were doing and why. July 10 White House meeting. On July 10, 2019, senior Ukrainian national security officials met with Ambassador Bolton, Ambassador Volker, Dr. Hill, Secretary Perry, myself, and many others in Washington, D.C. During that meeting, we all discussed the importance of the two action items I identified earlier: 1, a working phone call, and 2, a White House meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky. From my perspective, the July 10 meeting was a positive step toward accomplishing our shared goals. While I am now aware of accounts of the meeting from Dr. Hill and Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, their recollections of those events simply don't square with my own or with those of Ambassador Volker or Secretary Perry. I recall mentioning the prerequisite of investigations before any White House call or meeting. But I do not recall any yelling or screaming as others have said. Instead, after the meeting, Ambassador Bolton walked outside with the group, and we all took pictures together on the White House lawn. Most important, those recollections of protest do not square with the documentary record of our interactions with the NSC in the days and weeks that followed. We kept the NSC apprised of our efforts, including, specifically, our efforts to secure a public statement from the Ukrainians that would satisfy President Trump's concerns. For example, on July 13, just 3 days after the July 10 meeting, I emailed Tim Morrison. He had just assumed Dr. Hill's post as NSC Eurasia Director, and I met him that day for the first time. I wrote to Mr. Morrison, with these exact words: the call between Zelensky and POTUS should happen before 7/21 parliamentary elections. Sole purpose is for Zelensky to give POTUS assurances of new sheriff in town. Corruption ending, unbundling moving forward, and any hampered investigations will be allowed to move forward transparently. Goal is for POTUS to invite him to Oval. Volker, Perry, Bolton, and I strongly recommend. Morrison acknowledged, said thank you, and specifically noted he was tracking these issues. Again, there was no secret regarding moving forward and the discussion of investigations. Moreover, I have reviewed other State Department documents, some of which are not currently in the public domain, detailing Mr. Giuliani's efforts. For example, on July 10, 2019, the very same day that Ambassador Volker, Secretary Perry, and I were meeting with Ukraine officials in Washington, Ambassador Taylor received a communication that Mr. Giuliani was still talking with Ukrainian prosecutor Yuri Lutsenko. In WhatsApp messages with Ambassador Volker and I, Ambassador Taylor wrote to us as follows: just had a meeting with Andriy and Vadim, referring to Ukraine Foreign Minister Vadim Prystayko. Taylor said the Ukrainians were, quote, very concerned about what Lutsenko told them, that, according to RG, meaning Rudy Giuliani, the Zapatas meeting will not happen. Volker responded, good grief. Please tell Vadim to let the official USG representative speak for the US, Lutsenko has his own self-interest here. Taylor confirmed that he had communicated that message to the Ukrainians. He added, "I briefed Ulrich this afternoon on this," referring to State Department Counselor Ulrich Brecht-Buell.
We hope you enjoyed this video and that you appreciate our efforts to stop Trump and his cronies before they do any more damage. Please don't forget to click subscribe, hit the golden bell icon, and make sure you have notifications enabled on your account. To enable notifications, simply search "How to enable notifications on my YouTube account." USA Disgrace.